So, we're gonna do a recap now. Viktor Orban, the person that has been standing in the way of the European Union, so to speak, or rather has been, in a way, standing in the way of Ukraine because he has been the only person who has been vetoing aid for the 50 billion bill for Ukraine. You know what? We're not going to be reading any articles. I know all that I need to know. Apart from a few details that I might have to get from an article. But apart from those few details, I'm totally just going to be here in front of the camera talking about Orban, okay? This is going to be just me because I've got knowledge. I don't need to read articles. I have it all in my head. It's all in my head. You don't come here to watch me read boring articles. You watch me to give me your opinions or whatever. Okay, let's go. I'm ready. So Orban, the person that has been vetoing aid for Ukraine, 50 billion euro, 54 billion dollars, $54 billion, give or take. And Europe has been basically trying to get Viktor Orban to get off the veto and to get on board with the European Union. The European Union, according to Financial Times, has went as far as to threaten to target Hungary's economy should Viktor Orban not agree to lift the veto, which was actually yesterday when it comes to European time. And also there has been an option to strip Hungary of its voting right in the European Union altogether, which was an option that, although some people might tell you differently, the European Union was very hesitant to use this nuclear option against Hungary. And should the veto have been upheld, the European Union would be forced to seek other forms of financing to get the big bag of money. And that would be to sort of create this other type of financing to which individual countries would need their individual parliaments agreement, which would mean that it would take a long time and there would be a lot of proceduralism involved, even more than now. And nobody wants that because there's a war going. Ukraine is experiencing a critical shortage of shells. And Ukraine just does not have time. Ukraine also has a huge budget deficit, which has to be plugged through the European funds. Well, also actually ideally through the US funds, but those are not going well, and it doesn't seem like they will go well anytime soon. So everybody has been wondering what's happening. Will Orban lift the veto, especially since he has seemingly doubled down on his main condition for lifting the veto? And that would be to give him the annual ability to veto the multi-year plan of financing of the 50 billion euro. That was seemingly his condition that he would not back off of. And everybody was confused because there was an official visit of Hungary to Ukraine, there were some positive signals that things could be moving forward, and everyone was very confused by what Orban was doing. Everyone was wondering if he was trying to do some last minute deal or some last minute desperate bid in order to not seem weak. But we here at the amazing Lucy has a thing, or rather, my sort of domestic expert on the topic of Hungary, the producer of this channel that has been following the career of Viktor Orban for decades, quite literally, has posed to me that she believed that the deal was basically done at the moment of the meeting in Ukraine, when talks of bilateral financing for infrastructure purposes were being held. At that point, my channel Hungary expert basically said that she believed that the veto would be lifted by Orban. And the reasoning behind this is this. Viktor Orban does not have any ideological belief, any deep-seated ideological belief, being pro-Ukraine, being pro-Russia, being pro-Ukraine Union, or any other such thing. Viktor Orban believes in the number one guy. And the number one guy is Viktor Orban. And the number one thing that Viktor Orban cares about is his own regime. And, of course, upkeeping said regime. Karasu Kafka is the resident expert. And so, what Orban has what happened is that we are seeing investment into Hungary from the European Union. The aforementioned important infrastructure investment into, from what I've been translated from Hungarian sources, rail tracks. I think it also included roads that would allow better flow on the Ukrainian-Hungarian border, which is a pretty big investment, right? Which means that in these troubled times of war, when countries that are near Ukraine are suffering from huge inflation, huge rises in prices, and for many people, the lowering of standard of life, such investment means, as Karasu has just said in the chat, redistribution of funds, money, and power. Right? For as long as he and he has to fight to control such redistributional institutes. Right? So he's fighting for funds to keep himself in power, in other words. And those funds came in the, at least as far as we know, in the form of, among other things probably, the investment in the infrastructure. And so came the 1st of February, the long-awaited day when the meeting on the 50 billion aid package would be decided. The world held its breath, especially the European Union held its breath, and many US pundits, political streamers have held their breath. What is going to happen? Is the veto going to be lifted? And the answer is yes. The veto has been lifted, and the 50 billion euro aid package has been approved because of the aforementioned dealings with Orban. And at the same time, which is very important, the European Union has also announced it will not unfreeze the 6 billion euro financing for Hungary. And I think this is important to talk about when it comes to discussing how Viktor Orban operates, you know? Because here's the important thing, and here is something that people are, in my opinion, missing. And I'm wondering if Karas will agree with me on this or not. So I'm gonna just say it. The 6 billion euro finance that the European Union is not gonna unfreeze is actually dependent on whether or not Viktor Orban meets certain standards that he has been breaking within his own country. And that would mean, in my opinion, that in order to get the 6 billion, Viktor Orban would actually have to weaken his grip on power. If he would have to sort of correct certain things that he has done to the democratic order in his country. That is my opinion. Which is why, also in my opinion, he will not do it for as long as he can. And he will seek alternative methods of financing that will not have such strings attached. Which is, in my opinion, again, what this whole Ukraine deal negotiation has been about. Getting financing that would not have strings attached that will demand from him basically fixing democracy in his own country. And from what I know, the infrastructure funding does not have such strings attached. So that would be a win for Orban's regime. Exactly. So my thinking on that topic is correct then. Orban is simply looking for alternative financing from the same source, mind you, that will not have certain strings attached and that will enable him to strengthen his rule as it is without having to do any positive changes in the country. And that is what we're seeing now with the deal made with the European Union. So that is what happened. Okay, this is an important aspect of this whole thing. Why? Because many pundits, many articles I've seen, a lot of the media online at least, have framed this whole Orban thing as Orban losing. Okay? I've seen a lot of people saying that Orban has lost, that Orban has been basically pressured into folding. And that is not exactly what happened. I would go as far as to say Orban has won in this situation because he got what he wanted in the end. Okay? It is important not to look at this situation and come to the conclusion that Orban has simply lost. That might be the perception. And ironically enough, that is a perception that serves Orban well, because if he just folded on the 50 billion, which he supposedly was supposed to be so tough about, that means he's a weakling, right? He folded. He's a champ, okay? He's a chum. Second, the European Union also said it would not unfreeze the 6 billion. So he also got screwed out of funding. So that's a double loss for Orban. Orban is a double chum in this scenario. There's even this photo when Orban is looking down at a document and everybody made memes that Orban is making a sad face because he lost in this whole thing, because the European Union has showed him who's boss, has pressured him, has shown the willingness to deprive him of the vote within the European Union, which, let's be honest, the European Union was very unwilling to do that. Very unwilling. And that the European Union has basically, some people use the phrasing, threatened to bloody Orban's nose in order to, one, make him fold now, and for him to understand that in the future he will not be able to misuse funds because this bloodied nose threat will be hanging above his head. That is what many people have taken out of this whole thing. That this is, in my opinion, a false perception of what happened. Because Orban did, in the end, get what he wanted. He got financing from a source that will not force him to make any positive changes to the democracy in Hungary. And in exchange, he lifted the veto, which is actually not as big of a pain for him as people assume, because people fundamentally think that Orban is a pro-Russian politician, which is also a very misleading thing to think. People think that Orban's politics are sort of informed by his pro-Russian stance. And in that way, the logical conclusion is Orban, again, has lost. The servant of Russia has lost because the 50 billion package has been passed, which is also a misleading conclusion to a misleading premise, because Orban is not a pro-Russian politician. Orban is not a pro-EU politician. Orban is not a pro-Ukraine politician. Orban is a pro-Orban politician. He will change alliances. He will change allegiances on a dime when he sees that such a move will allow him to stay in power and facilitate it. And as the chat says, people have to understand that Orban has been very anti-Russian up until the 2010s. Criticized, then the left-wing party in power in 2000s, making deals with China or Russia. He criticized deals with China and Russia. Okay? He is not a politician that has an ideological alliance or an ideological leaning towards Russia or the EU or any other group. His only allegiance is to himself and his seat of power. That is a very important thing to remember. And in this sense, we are celebrating an amazing victory for Ukraine, because the 50 billion will allow Ukraine to combat its budget deficiency and greatly help in the war effort, especially considering that Ukraine has been faced right now with a critical shortage of shells, artillery shells. And I would argue that in a big way, it is also a win for Europe, since if Ukraine, in the worst case scenario, would lose, Ukraine would become a huge boon for the newly reborn Russian Empire. And that would mean Putin would be highly encouraged and empowered to continue westward. For example, to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland. The sky's the limit, right? Should he be able to win and sort of build up on his success, who knows what could be happening, which is why aid is crucial. Aid is just a crucial thing that we need as much of as possible. We need Europe to manufacture its own arms and send it to Ukraine as much as possible and as fast as possible, which is also crucial and not always necessarily the case. But it is also bad news for Hungary. And that is also something that we need to recognize. That it is what happened on the 1st was, in effect, a continuation of the policy of the European Union and Orban from the past. It is enabling Orban in exchange for gaining something back. It is a deal with the devil, so to speak. You get what you really wish for, but in exchange, you also give a part of your soul. Agreement flies in the face of the narrative about Ukraine fatigue, but that's a whole other topic. The so-called Ukraine fatigue that everybody's talking about, right? So that flies in the face of that. And of course, Polish Prime Minister has given a very intense and very heated speech about Orban, which actually we're gonna see, because he said in very strong words, Orban has to decide on whether or not he is part of the European community or not.
Okay. It is a problem for all of us. I mean, there is no problem with so-called, Ukraine fatigue, for sure. We have Orban fatigue now here in Brussels. We have so many things to solve. Look at the street, not only in Brussels. And of course, what we need today is to strengthen our unity around Ukraine and versus Russia and its aggressive policy. I can't understand, I can't accept this very strange and very egoistic game of Viktor Orban. And there is no room for compromise on our principles like rule of law and for...
I mean, you say there's no compromise, but the fact of the matter is a compromise has been reached. That is the whole problem of that is the problem of this whole situation. You say that there is no compromise, but there is a compromise. A compromise has been reached. The veto has been lifted, and Orban has gotten his funding.
For sure, there's no room for compromise on Ukraine question. And this is why what we can offer to Viktor Orban, as always, it's to treat him fair, according to our rules and procedures, and nothing else.
But he doesn't treat you fair. Should there be consequences, especially if there's no agreement, and if you stay longer and find an agreement with 26 countries? Should we also be thinking about consequences for Hungary?
First of all, I think we have to be more optimistic when it comes to our power of our arguments, and I think that there's no plan B, in fact. And this is for Viktor Orban to decide if Hungary is a part of our community or not. And
I want to listen
first
to
of all,
this
I think we
again.
have to be
Consequences, especially if there's no agreement, and if you stay longer and find an agreement on 320.
This speech was given before the veto was lifted, by the way. Keep in mind, this is a speech from, I'm pretty sure this is a speech from before the veto was had been lifted. And yes, this is Donald Tusk, the new Polish Prime Minister.
6 countries should also be thinking about consequences for Hungary.
First of all, I think we have to be more optimistic when it comes to our power of our arguments, and I think that there's no plan B, in fact. And this is for Viktor Orban to decide if Hungary is a part of our community or not. And
it sounds very nice, but in reality, what this means in practice is there is no plan B. We have to be optimistic. We are going to get a deal that's going to be satisfactory for both parties involved. We're going to get a mutually beneficial deal.
It's clear, it's black and white context, There's my intuition, my instinct is that we will find some strong arguments to convince, at the end of the day, also Viktor.
The strong arguments being financing. The strong argument being money. And, investment.
I think it's my assessment is a little bit different when it comes to December European Council, and because for me the most important thing is the very pragmatic result when it comes to our assessment, the financial support for Ukraine, and this is the goal number one. I hope not only for me, but. Yes, I think that not today, I hope not today, but in a mid-term perspective, we have to think about more how can I use it? Maybe not tough measures, but more clear consequences. I don't. Yeah, the situation is clearly different because it's the Ukrainian question is an existential one, not only for Poland, for all of us, and this today that.
I would agree. That is a pretty existential topic for Poland, all things considered. So yeah, I would definitely agree with this assessment.
The position of Viktor Orban, this is a threat for our security. It's something so obvious and at the same time unacceptable. And this is why we have to think about all possible measures and all possible consequences in the future, but maybe not today.
How can a compromise look like?
You promised me that it will be a quick one question.
There are no quick questions. There are only long questions.
Ask me this operation. Do you believe that a good decision that you will participate in the Red Sea
It
operation?
is an existential problem for most of us. I mean, even to Hungarians. I mean, the closer you are, the bigger an existential problem. Okay, I'm gonna rephrase that. The closer you are, the bigger an immediate existential problem it becomes. It is a far lesser existential problem for people in the US, probably. At least on paper.
To support US and UK.
That's it for now. So we've got this element of the puzzle. And we've also got a different interesting element of the puzzle, which I would like to read, because Hungary has not only agreed to sort of unveto the funding itself, Hungary has also agreed, from what I understand, part of the funding of the 50 billion euro will actually happen from the Russian frozen assets in the European Union. And for this, we're gonna actually look at an article, because this one I do not have in my head. And we're gonna see. I think we've touched upon the most important thing that you're not gonna see anywhere else, and that is what Orban's logic is, what the game is. That yes, he has actually gained something from this. It's actually not a loss for Orban, believe it or not. In my opinion, it's not as much as Viktor Orban has backed down or folded, but rather he has gotten what he wanted, basically. Even if it means the creation of the so-called Orban fatigue. That is not something that he is much bothered with, as long as he gets what he wants. Russia's frozen assets are generating billions. The European Union is getting ready to send them to Ukraine. London, CNN, Russian assets frozen in European accounts are generating billions of dollars in interest payments that could be diverted to help repair Ukraine's war-torn economy. And the European Union just took a step closer to doing that. What is interesting about this is that for legal reasons, I'm not a legal expert by any means, grabbing the actual, I think it's 300 billion, yeah. Grabbing the actual 300 billion euro is not something that the European Union can just do. The procedure for that is complicated enough that the European Union does not even want to touch that. But, as we've discussed before, the generated profit is a far, apparently, logistically and legally easier thing to do. So that is what's gonna happen here. The funds generated through the frozen assets from Russia by the European Union are going to fuel some of the 50 billion aid package that is about to happen. So, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Western countries froze nearly half of Moscow's foreign reserves, some 300 billion, 327 billion, around 200 billion, 218 US billion, sits in the European Union, mostly at Euroclear, a financial institution that keeps assets safe for banks, exchanges, and investors. EU leaders agreed a crucial 50 billion euro funding package for Ukraine, which is actually, it's written incorrect here. It's 50 billion euro, and which translates to about 54 billion dollars. It's not 50 billion dollars. It's 54 billion dollars funding package for Ukraine on Thursday and came closer to finalizing a plan to use the profits piling up in Euroclear's account. In a statement issued at the end of a summit, EU leaders said potential revenues could be generated concerning the use of extraordinary revenues held by private entities stemming directly from the immobilized Central Bank of Russia assets. Belgium-based Euroclear disclosed Thursday that it has earned 5.2 billion euro, 5.6 billion dollars. See, they did it correct here. 5.6 billion dollars in interest on income generated by sanctioned Russian assets since they were frozen by EU and group of 7 countries in 2022. The number of sanctions and counter-sanctions that have been introduced since February 2022 are unprecedented and continue to have a significant impact on the daily operations of Euroclear, the group said in a statement. The European Union and its allies are determined to make Russia foot part of the colossal bill for rebuilding Ukraine, estimated by the World Bank a year ago at $411 billion over the next decade. One proposal put forward by the European Commission would involve using a special levy to collect the windfall interest income, which would then be paid into the EU budget for the reconstruction of Ukraine. That plan has been delayed by the legal and financial concerns, with some EU member states and the European Central Bank worried that even carefully targeted measures could fall out of international law and shake confidence in the euro as the world's second biggest reserve currency. The EU has been at pains to contrast the illegality of Russia's invasion with its own strict adherence to the rule of law, which also unfortunately means that certain things will take time because they will be done legally and procedurally. That cannot be avoided if you want to do things to the letter of the law. EU member countries have now agreed in principle to tap this windfall interest income, although the details of how this will be done practically must still be ironed out. The EU diplomat told CNN lawyers are working. CNN lawyers. I have to learn how to read. We're going to read this again. EU member countries have now agreed in principle to tap this windfall interest income, although the details of how this will be done practically must still be ironed out, an EU diplomat told CNN. Lawyers are working on the text of the agreement before returning it to EU member states for final approval. In its earnings statement, Euroclear, which settles cross-border trades and safeguards more than 40 trillion. In its earnings statement, Euroclear, which settles cross-border trades and safeguards more than $40 trillion in assets, said it was focused on minimizing potential legal and operational risks that may arise from proposals by EU officials to hand the money to Ukraine. Euroclear said additional administrative costs relating to the sanctions costed 62 million euro, $67 million last year, with considerable senior management and board focus on the topic. It added that cash on its balance sheet soared 38 billion euro, $41 billion year on year to 162 billion euro, $175 billion, boosted by payments associated with frozen Russian assets, including bonds. These payments include, for example, interest paid on bonds known as coupons or the proceeds generated by securities that mature and are reinvested, Ordinarily, these payments would have been made to Russian bank accounts, but they have been blocked by the sanctions and are generating vast amounts of interest, even more so given the recent spate of rate hikes. Um, Euroclear, for its part, is embroiled in several legal proceedings pertaining to the sanctions, almost exclusively in Russian courts, as claimants seek to access the assets blocked in its books. The company said it continues to retain profits related to these assets until further guidance is provided on the distribution of management of such profits. And this is important because this is also something that Hungary has, along with other European Union countries, agreed to unlock and use in the 50 billion euro package. The most important thing that there won't be an annual veto. That's an important. There will be some sort of a debate every 2 years.